Blog Talk Radio.
We interrupt this broadcast for an emergency announcement. A massive earthquake. The flood has reached. All roads into and out of are closed. No medical services. Store shelves have been stripped.
What's coming? Are you ready? You are at the right place to hear the best ways to stay safe and weather the coming storm. Welcome to Power Preppers. Here is your host, Patricia Baker.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Power Preppers. I am your host, Patricia Baker, and my mission is to make getting prepared for any emergency easy and efficient. Get healthy, get informed, and get prepared. Now, please remember to sign up for our newsletter at supernaturalgirlswithz.com. For all the latest show information, we have discounts there, we have giveaways on both Power Preppers and Supernatural Girls Radio. We have some terrific products for you where you can get a discount by using the Power Prep code, so be sure to check that out. We also have a Supernatural store, which has terrific gifts, including a prosperity prayer in the ancient angelic language, and private readings offered at a 10% discount by Becky Andreasen and me. Well, this Saturday night, my co-host Becky and I will be speaking with our biggest guest of the year, Travis Walton. Now, Travis had a close encounter of the third kind in November of 1975. His incredible story was reported in the book and Hollywood movie Fire in the Sky. And this will be an unusual interview, everybody. You've got to tune into this because Becky Andreasen is also a UFO abductee of great renown, and she will be interviewing Travis right along with me. So be sure to join us this Saturday and every Saturday night, 9 to 11 Eastern Time. This is going to be one exciting evening. Now today, we have another very special guest, Dr. Robert Schoch. And Robert is a tenured faculty member at Boston University. He earned his doctorate in geology and geophysics at Yale. He is the author of an incredibly fascinating book, which I could not put down. It is a great book, and it is called Forgotten Civilization, The Role of Solar Outbursts in Our Past and Future. It's available on Amazon.com. And welcome, Robert. You are live on the air.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day. You know, this is such an important topic, and I really mean it. This book was excellent. People might look at it and just think it's a little too scientific for them or over their heads. It isn't. You made this a fascinating read. So it's a great book, first and foremost.
I appreciate that very much.
Now, you have a lot of information in this book about ancient civilization, and you also kind of redated the Sphinx, which is a fascinating topic in and of itself. But all of this information it leads me to ask you a tremendous amount of questions. Again, we've got a lot of things to cover, but I'm going to let you start at the beginning. How did you come to write this book?
Well, it was really a culmination of decades of research and decades of work. I am a classically trained, as you stated, classically trained in geology and geophysics and history. And the classical paradigm is that civilization began about 3500 BC. But the research I've been working on, including the Great Sphinx for the last 20-plus years, indicates that that's not the situation at all, that civilization or civilizations actually go back to a much earlier period, including back to the end of the last ice age, about 12,000 years ago. And what we really see when we look at the evidence is a cycle, if I could put it that way, of civilizations coming and going, natural catastrophes that have devastated earlier civilizations, essentially set humanity back. before new civilizations emerged or re-emerged. And I think this is a very important story, not just for reinterpreting ancient history, but also coming right up to the present day and how we need to prepare for the future. That many people, I believe, and maybe not your listeners, but many people of the general public sort of have a very ho-hum, complacent attitude that nothing really changes, that they're immune to natural events, and that, I think, is absolutely wrong. And we see that throughout history and throughout ancient history, and we need to be aware of that.
I agree,
for the
and
forthcoming
you're right.
future.
Our listeners are pretty astute, and obviously they're listening to this program to hear information like this. They want to be in the know, and they want to be prepared. But you're so right. There are many people that just get a glazed-over look in their eyes, and they walk away, and they're like, well, what am I going to do about it anyways? Whatever's going to be is going to be. And it's not really a good attitude, in my opinion, to have. Plus, there are ways to prepare. It's not a fait accompli that you're going to get wiped off the planet due to a solar flare, but your life will change as a result of a solar flare.
Exactly.
So there are many things that we need to talk about today, just in terms of even understanding the sun. You have a lot of information in here in your book. It's a great book called Forgotten Civilization, about the sun. And first, let's go there. Can you tell us about the sun as an entity? It's alive. Yeah, it's changing.
It is. It's alive. It's changing, and it ties in with the story I was starting to outline, that the sun is not as stable as most people want to believe. Even astrophysicists and scientists in the past decades have thought that the sun was relatively stable. In a way, they treated our sun as an exceptional star. When you start looking at other stars go through natural cycles of more energetics, less energetics, more stability, less stability, if I could put it that way. They undergo turbulence. We have what are sometimes known as solar flares, smaller solar flares, larger solar flares, what are known as coronal mass ejections, when material is basically outbursts from the sun. Materials emitted from the sun as these huge balls of ionized gas, technically known as plasma. And something that I talk about in Forgotten Civilization is that our sun, which is frankly a fairly typical star, like other typical stars, goes through cycles. And these are not just the sun cycles that most people are aware of, 11-year basis or a 22-year basis, but there are also cycles on the order of hundreds of years, thousands of years, and even tens of thousands of years. So one of the very, very important cycles, I believe, is the cycle that is about 10 to 12,000 years in duration, and about 12,000 years ago, and this is the end of the last ice age, our sun was incredibly active. It went through incredible variability, so it went through periods of real instability, and it was having all kinds of solar outbursts. Then it calms down and seems like it's almost died, if you would, becomes very calm for a short period of time. Then it undergoes incredible solar outbursts again, and this is what was happening about 9,000, 10,000 years ago, and I believe that all the data points to the fact that this is actually what brought the last ice age to a close, with dramatic climate changes, dramatic changes on the surface of the Earth, and really we can talk about it in more detail, but incredible geological changes which affected civilizations at the time. And we now know from my work on the Great Sphinx, work in Turkey at a site called Göbekli Tepe, for instance. I was just in Indonesia looking at another very ancient site from this time period, that there were true civilizations at that time, but they were devastated by what was happening about 10,000 BC. Now, why is this relevant? It's relevant because the sun undergoes this cycle. It had this turbulent period, should we say, about 10,000 BC. Then over several thousand years, it calmed down, was relatively stable, but is going through this variability, this turbulence once again. And this has been well documented by astrophysicists, that all of a sudden our sun is doing very strange, very unusual things. And
so we're certainly seeing more extreme weather patterns here.
Exactly. So we're seeing more extreme weather patterns now. And what I was going to say is that based on isotope studies, based on ice core data, our sun is now more turbulent, more active than it has been since the end of the last ice age. So we're going back into this very strange, from a human perspective, aspect of the sun, our turbulent period in the sun. And we are seeing now the ramifications of that with weather patterns and extreme weather patterns and hazards associated with that. Something that I think is very important to bring up in our discussion this afternoon is the Carrington event. And
now, what is that?
The Carrington event was 1859, but from a geological and astrophysical perspective, that's like yesterday. So 1859, and there was a huge solar flare, actually a pair of huge solar flares, and associated coronal mass ejections of plasma or electrically charged particles from the sun, which hit smack into the Earth. This is the largest event in recorded human history for a solar outburst. But, of course, recorded human history doesn't go back that far, so it's not a really good sample. But 1859, so keep the date in mind. 1859, what was the state of electronics? It was very primitive. They had telegraph lines, and that was, frankly, about it. They had some, where technically known as magnetometers, or they called it magnetospheres, that type of thing, in 1859. So they were measuring in a crude sense, relative to modern terms, they were measuring the magnetic flux of the Earth, the magnetosphere of the Earth. They had telegraph lines. This event occurred. It hit the atmosphere of the Earth, the coronal mass ejections, the solar flares. It caused incredible geomagnetic storms, what are referred to as geomagnetic storms. It caused direct current to start being transmitted through the telegraph lines of the time.
Wow.
So it overloaded the telegraph lines. It actually literally burnt down telegraph stations because they were so overloaded. It just caused everything to go crazy in the primitive electronics of the time. So it was devastating in that sense, but of course there was not much reliance on electrical phenomena in 1859. So for most people, life just went on. It didn't really cause many problems.
Right, they got back into their horse and buggy and, went into town. So, yeah, so it wasn't a big deal.
It wasn't a big deal except for maybe some of the very wealthy who, depended on telegraph to get the latest stock information or something.
Right. There you go.
But even then, it was 1859. This is pre-Civil War. It just wasn't a big deal. But my point is, that was yesterday geologically. I think that is just the classic, as they say, the shot across the bow, the warning sign of what is going to come and could come literally any time because the sun is going through this period of instability. If we had a Carrington event today, it would devastate modern society. It would
tell us in great detail so everybody understands the significance of this. What would happen?
If we had a Carrington-level event today, which is quite conceivable, to be honest, it would devastate modern technological society. It would overload the power grid systems. It would knock out transformers. And this is not just me saying this. There have been NASA studies, there have been National Academy of Science studies, the British government, the Australian government. A number of very high-powered, reputable organizations have looked into this. They've been a little bit quiet about it, perhaps. But it would knock out grid systems, for instance, around the technological world. So electrical power would be off. It would knock out transformers. Without transformers up and running, you don't get electrical power to major cities, to homes. Without electrical power, most people don't realize how many things will be impossible. You won't have water, for instance,
right,
because water treatment plants won't work. Pumps won't work. You won't be able to get gasoline because you need electric pumps to pump the little bit of gasoline that would be at service stations. Even if you have an oil burner typically or a gas burner, they won't work without electricity. So you can't use elevators. You can't use escalators if you're in a high-rise apartment.
What about cars? Would we be able to drive our cars? Because they all have computers in them now.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. Not only do you have this coronal mass ejection, but you have what are known as solar proton events and EMPs, electromagnetic pulses associated with such events. That would wipe out electronics. So your car would not work if it's a modern car, say pre-1970 or so, because electronics just won't work in it. So you can't just hop into your car and turn it on if, again, I don't want to be a scaremonger. I just want to be realistic. If something like this happens, modern, newer model cars, the electronics, as my wife sometimes says to me when we get frustrated with our modern car, it's a computer on wheels. But those computers will be knocked out. I was going to say communication will be knocked out. Satellites will literally fall from the sky. And I say that literally because not only will their electronics go out, so they always need to be adjusted for their orbits, that type of thing, but ionization of the upper atmosphere will actually change the density, so they will move in slightly different orbits at different speeds. And people don't realize it, but you have to keep something at the proper speed and the proper height for it to stay in orbit, a satellite.
So their trajectories could become very erratic, and as a result, they could just fall down on people's heads, too. So. Yeah,
exactly. A lot of them will burn up as they fall down, but yes. So, you think about modern communication, that's not going to work. You think about computers, they're not going to work in a worst-case scenario, or even less than a worst-case scenario. Cars aren't going to turn on. Electrical grid systems are going to be knocked out. Something that I'm very, concerned about is how do we get power? A lot of power is nuclear power. And we saw a little foreshadowing of what could happen with Fukushima. If a nuclear power plant loses electricity, it's almost ironic because they're supposed to be making electricity.
Yes.
But they need a constant supply of electricity to circulate cooling substances, usually water, that type of thing, to keep things at a proper temperature, Most power plants, they not only have the nuclear fuel rods and the containment vessel and the reactor, but they have on-site a lot of very hot, and I use that in both terms, both temperature hot and also radioactive hot waste products, from the nuclear cycle. And we've seen in Fukushima that's a continuing problem because it lost power. That's really the problem with Fukushima. Now, if that happens at the hundreds of nuclear power plants that we have in the technological world, or even just a couple of them, you've got major concerns with radiation leaks, losses. So there are a lot of issues that I think we need to be concerned about in terms of a major solar outburst, solar flare, and associated phenomena. And again, I am the last person that wants to be a scaremonger or someone that is an alarmist, that type of thing. But I think we really need to care about the planet. And I do want to mention that my attitude is that both we need to prepare individually to take care of ourselves and our families, but a lot of it, I think, needs to be community-oriented and even up to planet-wide oriented, that we need to be talking about these issues. We need to be addressing them and not I don't want to.
We don't want a knee-jerk reaction
things, but what
to this? We don't want to be in a knee-jerk reaction position to this.
That's right. We don't want to be a knee-jerk reaction to this, and I think a lot of these really we need to think through things well before anything happens. And we don't need to have the short-sighted attitude that I hate to say a lot of people, including major leaders and politicians, have of, what do I do to get elected in the next 2-year cycle, and versus thinking about long-term planning, long-term working together to address what could be major issues.
Well, you bring up a lot of important points in just what you just said. Certainly our government officials that are elected are only concerned about being reelected for the most part. And without term limits, that is their focus. So how we fit into that is as an afterthought, and the health of the planet fits into that as an afterthought, or is it something that will get them reelected? It's not about looking forward into the future and getting prepared. And I think you also brought up a really good point in your book on that stupid ClimateGate and that big fraud that was perpetrated upon us about global warming, and how that still some people still believe it, and they don't realize that all these resources, all these grants, all this money was funneled into this complete fake thing. And meanwhile, you're talking about something that's real, and it's right in front of us today, and it's not getting the kind of ink or the kind of attention it should be getting.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to point out, too, that one reason for looking at the past is to see what's going to happen in the future, to have a sense of it. And I also think that we need to learn from the past. How should I put it? Some of the past politicians were not necessarily like present politicians, I feel. At least some of the cultures, they seem to have had a sense of longer-term concerns. Maybe they learned the hard way in some cases.
Maybe.
But thinking about and planning for the future. So one thing I talk about in the book, and again, to me, it's not sort of a voyeuristic, isn't it just neat to study ancient people because they were very old and different from us. No, it's more that we share things in common with them, and they went through these things in the past. No, they didn't have the exact same technology we have, but they were dealing with these types of things, and some of them survived, some of them didn't, but we need to learn from that. And I'll give an example. For instance, when you have a major solar outburst, you see things in the sky. And what I mean by that is even in 1859, when there was the Carrington event, the major solar outburst, people described at the time seeing what looked like dancing figures in the sky. And really what this has to do with is what people know as the northern lights or the southern lights, the aurora borealis, the aurora australis.
Yeah, right, those are beautiful.
And they're beautiful when it's harmless, but for instance in 1859, these were seen not just at high latitudes, but around the world, in many cases at extremely low latitudes, because what we had at that point were the major solar flares and coronal mass ejections. So you had these beautiful things in the sky, one could say, but they were the forewarning, if you would, of what was coming. And at that time didn't affect most people because, as we talked about, most people weren't connected to the telegraph, so it didn't bother them.
Right, exactly.
But
let me ask you, I do have a question from... I just have one question from the chat room I just want to jump in with because it's a very interesting question. And it's simply this. If we have a major solar flare event, is it likely to be a global event, or is it likely to just affect one part of the globe, like maybe one continent versus everything?
That's a very good point. And this actually ties in with what I was just starting to talk about. It tends to be global. It will be global because what happens is when it impacts the atmosphere of the Earth, for instance, a coronal mass ejection, and starts causing geomagnetic storms, those spread all over the Earth. So it's not like a comet, for instance, that might hit one hemisphere or one continent or one ocean, where you're talking about physical mass. yes, this is physical, but think of a gas or electrically charged particles. Once they start interacting with the magnetic field of the Earth, with the magnetosphere, they spread globally. So something that we have, and I talk about in Forgotten Civilization, is records of what people were seeing in the sky, and that's why I was starting to talk about seeing these things in the sky.
Yes.
And these are recorded globally for the last major catastrophes at the end of the last ice age. What are sometimes known as petroglyphs are engravings which mimic, and plasma physicist Dr. Anthony Perrott has researched this around the globe, found in over 130 countries. You find these ancient petroglyphs that are diagnostic of what you would see in the sky during a major, major, major solar outburst. And so this is a global phenomenon. He has been able to document this very well. When I say we, my wife, Catherine Ulysses, actually first hit upon this, and it's been confirmed since, that the Rongo, for instance, on Little Easter Island in the Pacific, apparently records what was happening or was inspired by what was happening in the sky. It's a record of what was happening. Now, this is in a place where you normally wouldn't expect to have the ramifications of major solar outbursts, because we tend to think in terms of high latitudes, very far north or south.
Right.
But
right.
it spreads globally.
So we would all be affected, no matter where we are living, whether you're living in the United States or Russia. It's not going to matter. It's going to affect everybody.
Yeah, it's going to affect everyone, and I think we see that from the past record. We see that, and something else I wanted to say is, for instance, with these past records, the glyphs, for instance, the petroglyphs or the Rongo script, which apparently I believe was inspired by this last solar outburst and may actually be a record of what was being seen in the sky at that time. I think that we need to really study these past ancient records very carefully to get insights into what is going to happen. And I say is going to happen because I think it's just inevitable in the future. And they're not written in modern scientific, text and script, and we have to interpret them appropriately. But I think that there's information that's very necessary there to look at and we can learn from.
I agree, and it is about time that we put some resources in that direction. But we can't just look to the government and expect them to do anything that makes any sense at this point. I think it's got to come from people like you who are knowledgeable. You have a Ph.D. after your name, and hopefully people are going to listen and gather some resources together and follow your lead and get this going. So hang on, everybody. We're going to take a very short commercial break and come back to this fascinating discussion with Dr. Robert Schoch, and he is the author of a great book called Forgotten Civilization, The Role of Solar Outbursts in Our Past and Future. It's available on Amazon.com. Stay tuned, everybody. We will be right back.
Bonjour, this is Veronique Raskin, founder of the Organic Wine Company. As one of the pioneers of the organic wine movement, since 1980, I have brought you the very best and most authentic organic wines directly to your table. I work with small family estates who grow certified organic grapes and produce exceptional wines. You can purchase our wines individually from our website at theorganicwinecompany.com or join one of our wine clubs. Our organic wines are perfect for you and for your family as gifts for friends and relatives, and they are simply spectacular for the holidays. Visit us at theorganicwinecompany.com to enjoy the very best organic wines conveniently delivered to your door. I am Veronique Raskin, passionate about my mission. I offer to you vegan, organic, and biodynamic wines made by people of the heart, wines with a heart. Au revoir. Call us at 1-888-ECO-WINE.
Are you ready for a new experience of freedom and powerful connection? Would you like a positive, effortless change in your life? Then come to CosmicFusion.com, where we offer the most advanced energy clearing and expansion techniques in the world, with a quantum vortex energy to activate your divine blueprint and life's purpose. When your soul leads the way with cosmic fusion and quantum vortex energy, you can break clear of past difficulties and blocks with the power of the source. With cosmic fusion, the source energy does the work for you. It's easy and effortless. Listen to our free meditation right from our Cosmic Fusion website, the Cosmic Code Meditation. Sign up for one of our interactive webinars today. Come to Cosmic Fusion, www.cosmicfusion.com, to experience an effortless awakening and transformation. Are you ready for an upgrade? Are you ready for a new experience of living in the fifth dimensional magic and powerful connection? Then visit CosmicFusion.com today. CosmicFusion.com.
Your property tax bill. Have you seen it lately? It's frightening. Your property taxes are going up while your home value is going down. It's time to fight back and win. For the real truth about the property tax system, get attorney Pat Quintilian's book, Are You Getting Screwed on Your Property Taxes? How to Find Out and How to Fix It. Attorney Quintilian answers all your questions and gives you the facts you need to fight a property tax bill that is spiraling out of control. You'll also read about what happens to property owners who don't check their property records, only to find out too late they're taxed on square footage, fixtures, and even buildings that they don't own. Is this happening to you? Learn your rights. Buy attorney Pat Quintilian's book today. Are You Getting Screwed on Your Property Taxes? How to Find Out and How to Fix It. Available on Amazon.com.
Welcome back, everybody. We are talking with Robert Schoch, Ph.D., and he is the author of Forgotten Civilization, The Role of Solar Outbursts in Our Past and Future. And if this happens, Robert, we won't have to worry about property taxes at all. That's for sure. That may be the only upside to this event.
That's true. That's true. Actually, I want to make a comment along those lines because you reminded me. A lot of our records in modern civilization, many of our records, much of our money, our financial instruments, that's all electronic. I'm sure many of your readers realize that. And in a really bad case situation, a lot of that could disappear because it's not backed up with any kind of material. And I'm saying records now, much less forget about money not being backed up by gold or whatever. But it's not backed up by anything other than electronic bits in a computer.
That's right. So whatever you have in your bank account is on an electronic diary, and that could all disappear.
It could all disappear. I mean, I've heard estimates of up to well over 90% of all U.S. dollars, for instance, are actually just electronic bits in storage systems.
Yeah, this is all very very concerning. And again, though, you're trying so hard to bring this into our awareness so things can be done. And you talk about things that were done in ancient times. And one of the things I found very interesting in your book was your discussion about these tunnels that were discovered under Europe and Turkey that you thought might have been basically constructed for events like this, so people could survive events like this.
Yes, in fact, that's something, and I've been working on that since the book came out. As I mentioned, I was just in Indonesia, and you see the same thing. What we are finding with these early sites at the end of the last ice age is that they are associated with tunnels, they are associated with caves, they're associated with underground chambers, and this has been very mysterious to classical archaeologists and conventional prehistorians, people that study these things with a conventional paradigm, and they can't explain why would people go through all the effort of going into caves or elaborating on natural caves, of actually carving artificial underground structures. And in my opinion, when you start putting all the pieces together, where would you survive? How can you survive? It's by going underground. In a major solar outburst like this, that's where you could survive. So, for instance, in Turkey, you have a region called Cappadocia, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And this is known for the underground cities, incredible underground cities, multi-story cities. And most conventional archaeologists say, they date back to maybe a couple of thousand years ago. And I have no question that they were being used a couple of thousand years ago. But there is evidence, I believe, very clear evidence that the earliest portions of them go back 10,000, 12,000 years to these dramatic, catastrophic times. And since then, they've been elaborated upon, they've been expanded. Some have been turned into Byzantine churches, 1,000 years ago, that type of thing. Wow. And I also believe there was a collective memory for thousands of years after the end of the last ice age that, look, this happened to our ancestors. It could happen again. We should make preparations so that, what if it happened again?
Right, because, when you talk about this event, and let me just kind of throw this back at you and tell me if I've got this correct or not. Mm-hmm. It's more than just a solar flare comes to and affects the planet by knocking out all of our electronics, maybe devastates our financial system. It's more than that, because from what I read in your book, it's also about setting off major earthquakes. It can also
absolutely.
Set off
I'm glad you brought that up. Let me elaborate on that. It's more than just knocking out electronics. We think of that because that would be the most immediate thing for our modern technological society. But what it will do is it'll cause severe climatic changes. With a major solar outburst, in some cases you will actually see in certain areas. So this is something that will be more regional, and it's hard to predict exactly where it would occur, but you could literally have what will look like huge bolts of lightning hitting the surface, and these are electrical discharges. And where it hits the surface where there are flammable things, it will set off fires naturally, and you could have extreme fires, wildfires, that type of thing. Other places, what it will do is it'll melt glaciers if it's very far north or south, high latitudes. This is what happened at the end of the last ice age. Major glaciers were melted. Also, when it hits water, whether it's ice or liquid water, hits the ocean, it will cause evaporation. So you have major amounts of moisture being put into the atmosphere that has to come back down as rain. This actually ties in with my early work on the Sphinx because it's eroded by water despite being in the modern Sahara Desert. And it goes back to that earlier period.
Fascinating. That was a fascinating discovery on your part.
Oh, thank you. So you have torrential rains. Think of the biblical floods and the biblical concept. And it's not just biblical. In every culture in the world, you have these traditions that there was a time when there were these torrential rains. I think this is the answer to it. It will set off earthquakes and volcanic activity. Why? Because you're changing parameters on the surface of the Earth. You're melting ice at high latitudes. This releases pressure, which has a cascading effect or sort of a domino effect around the world, causing tectonic plate basically imbalances, which sets off earthquakes and volcanic activity. Even with the mild, what's known as global warming that we see today, this has been documented in Iceland, where the glaciers are melting very quickly, that there is increase in, by order of magnitude actually, increase in volcanic and earthquake activity. If we have a major solar outburst, things are just going to go really crazy. There's actually also correlations, even in the present day, between solar activity and earthquake activity. And most conventional scientists, they don't want to admit that there could be such a thing, and they say, it's just all coincidence. But I don't believe that for a second. There are very intimate relationships that we just don't quite understand at this point.
I agree.
So, yes, it would be much more than just wiping out the electronics. That would be, I hate to say it, only the beginning.
Yeah, it is. And then in terms of timing on an event like this, so it starts with a massive solar flare. You have a domino effect, goes all the way around the globe. You have volcanoes, earthquakes, large, what appear to be bolts of lightning, but are pieces of an electrical storm, it sounds
exactly.
like. So that's going to affect the ocean and all water on Earth. And about, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about a month-long event? Are we talking about...
No, that probably what we're talking about. Well, first off, you'll get very little immediate warning. And that's one of the things why we should be thinking long-term, like, well, if this happens, what can we do about it? You can't just decide, oh, we're now going to make preparations, because the first thing is going to be monitoring the sun, and the sun is monitored, but probably see a major solar flare and that a coronal mass ejection is coming. Depending on how fast it's moving, you've got somewhere between, maybe 16 hours to a couple of days, depending on how fast it's moving, before it hits. Now, it hits, we have all these ramifications, and then it seems to be over, and everyone has a big sigh of relief. That's not a correct attitude, should we say, because what you see in the geological data, based on isotopes and cores and what we can piece together, is that when the sun is in one of these phases, which I believe it's in right now, you have incredible solar activity. So you might have a major solar flare, coronal mass ejection. So it's like the sun hiccups, to use an anthropomorphic analogy, and then it sort of calms down, and everything seems fine, and everyone has a big sigh of relief, and then next thing you know, it hiccups again, maybe a month later, or maybe 2 months later, or maybe a year later, or maybe only a week later.
Wow.
So you can't say, oh, it's done, it's over. We can go back to normal routine.
This is just the beginning, and
that's just the beginning.
And
the time frame, again, you have to think in terms of, I'm a geologist, so maybe I have an easier time, or I'm more used to thinking in terms of geological time frames. But, a month is essentially no different than a year or 2 years for some geological phenomena. It could happen a month later, or it could happen 2 years later. That's sort of trivial when you're thinking, well, this is a period of activity in a time frame of 10,000 years, if that makes sense.
It does, and then it's not just the effect of on the planet, on our electronics, on our financial system, but what about on the human body? I mean, it sounds like things are going to be changing so rapidly. Those waves coming through from the sun, is that going to affect the human body? That's a question somebody has in our chat room right now.
Absolutely, because we are electromagnetic. There's no two ways about it. We are very sensitive, and I talk about this a little bit in Forgotten Civilization, I think especially in the last chapter. We are very sensitive to electromagnetic fields, electromagnetic radiation. So there's two aspects to it. And one, the more alarmist aspect, and I hate to be an alarmist, but I'm just trying to be honest, it could cause major radiation on the surface of the Earth. That's one reason I believe ancient people went underground, not just to escape the fires and the rain, that type of thing, but actual genuine levels of radiation on the surface of the Earth, which could be lethal in some cases. A fellow I know who's a physicist, Paul LaVioletta, and I talk about this in Forgotten Civilization, has done calculations showing that during a major solar outburst, as we saw at the end of the last ice age, it may have been a situation where there were lethal doses of radiation for large mammals. We are large mammals.
Yes, we are.
And the way to survive is to go underground into caves, because that will actually protect you. That will, the radiation can't penetrate, several meters of rock once you're there. But think about things like large mammoths and mastodons that went extinct. He hypothesizes, and I think it's a quite reasonable hypothesis, that some of them may have gone extinct because of what was happening on the surface in terms of not just climate changes, but actual levels of radiation. So that's one thing that we have to worry about. So that's a very dramatic short-term change.
Right.
Longer term, we are affected by sometimes people want to call it subtle energy, that type of thing. There's different terms for it, but we are affected by electromagnetic frequencies, electromagnetic radiation. Something that's very important here is Schumann resonances. Some people may know what Schumann resonances are. Other people may not. Let me try to explain it briefly.
Go ahead, please share that with our audience. I think most of them are aware of what they are, but go ahead if you can break it down for everybody.
But it's important to know what they are, because that is the resonance or the electromagnetic frequency that naturally travels between the surface of the Earth and the ionosphere. So it's basically the frequency of electromagnetic waves, radio waves, you could call it, light waves, whatever you want to call it, but electromagnetic radiation in very low frequencies, very long wavelengths. So you're talking such low frequencies as to be speaking of 7 or 8 or 15 hertz cycles per second, which is extremely long wavelength, slow, low frequency waves. But these are basic background electromagnetic waves that we are developed for, evolved for, however you want to say it. And it's been demonstrated that we are affected when Schumann resonances change. It affects our psyche. It affects our consciousness. It affects our brain functioning. It affects our ability to heal. So it has major, major ramifications. Our brain, people have heard of things like alpha waves and delta waves, brain waves. They are actually coordinated to Schumann resonances, which makes sense because that's the electromagnetic background that we developed in over tens of thousands of years.
Can this kind of thing, if it's disrupted or changes radically from a solar flare, then the Schumann resonances are going to obviously
They are going to change. Well, that's what I was getting to, because when you have a major solar flare or solar outburst, it can affect the ionosphere. So you affect physically the cavity that defines the Schumann resonances. And if you start changing that, it changes the Schumann resonances, and all of a sudden the Schumann resonance frequency changes to one that we're not capable of dealing with as efficiently, or one that we're not used to. I'll use a crude analogy. Think of all of a sudden audible sound. I'm using sound waves as an analogy, and all of a sudden there's this weird buzzing sound that you're not used to. It can really sort of drive you crazy if you would.
Yeah, it'd be like torture.
But this would be sort of at a subconscious level. Something like that could occur. It's also, I want to say, I got to throw this in. People are aware of HAARP, the experiments out of Alaska, that type of thing, where they just blast energy into the ionosphere. Well, that's disrupting the ionosphere. That can affect things like Schumann resonances. So, to be playing games with that doesn't make sense to me.
No, nor to me. And now, how about, though, in terms of the effect of a solar flare on our DNA? It's going to be affecting things in the ionosphere like the Schumann resonance, and that's going to be having an impact. That's going to be having an impact.
And, yes, if you have radiation levels or ionizing radiation, which you could have, that can absolutely affect DNA. That gets back to the first thing I was mentioning, which is when you have strong doses of radiation on the surface of the Earth, that could definitely affect DNA. Also, subjecting organisms to high doses or pulses of electromagnetic radiation seems to affect the genetics. It seems to affect developmental rates of organisms. This has been shown experimentally. It can have both positive and negative effects in some cases. You can take seeds, for instance, and subject them to electromagnetic frequencies, and in some cases they will basically mature more quickly, that type of thing. In other cases, you can subject seeds or eggs, for instance, fish eggs, to electromagnetic frequencies, and you basically get ancestral characteristics coming out when they mature. So it's strange. It's hard to predict exactly what will happen because it depends on the frequency, it depends on the organism. but we're biological organisms, and we can expect that something will occur.
Something's going to change for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make a wild jump here because we do a lot of shows, Becky Andreasen and I, on UFOs and extraterrestrials, and certainly we have a show coming up with Travis Walton, who had an encounter up close and personally with these beings. And I can't help but wonder sometimes if we're looking into the face of the future with these beings, and were they radically altered or genetically affected similarly to what we may be encountering soon. I just can't help but ask that question as wild as it may be.
I mean, I think it's not inconceivable, and I want to bring up another point here. All the ancient cultures around the world that I've studied, consistently they talk about it in slightly different terms. They give it different names, but they talk about cycles of culture. They talk about cycles of civilization. They talk about cycles of basically humanity and organisms. So the classical Greeks and Romans would talk about a gold, silver, bronze, and iron age. And I think that may tie in with what we're talking about here, too, of not just sort of a poetic, oh, it was nice back then and now it's lousy now, but real changes in organisms, including ourselves, caused by real phenomena like solar outbursts and solar changes.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's just so many places that we're looking for in, what's the next disaster? What's the next thing that's going to affect us? But in my opinion, what you're bringing to the table today is the most likely occurrence. And
yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, I think, yes, we know about Fukushima. Yes, we know we have severe and extreme weather. Yes, we know that our earthquakes are ramping up as well as the volcanoes. But the sun is such a powerful living entity, and as you have brought up in your research here in Forgotten Civilization, it is rapidly changing and becoming even more chaotic in the way that it's changing.
Exactly. So chaotic is a very good term for it, and it's a little, it's becoming very chaotic right now. At the very moment, people are talking about how, well, it's calming down, that type of thing, but to me, that's just the calm before the storm, as they say.
Exactly. Well, now, let me ask you this, Robert. You have all this information. How are you and your beautiful wife preparing for something like this?
Well, I'll tell you, we live in the Boston area. We live right in the city, and there's not a lot of way that we can personally prepare in the sense of we don't have a cave to go to, that type of thing. We try to take, some precautions. We have a few stores, but really, to me, the key is to work with communities, to work with people. I think, as I was saying earlier, I think this is something we really need to be discussing on not just a local level, but a national level, even a global level, and I think that's the real solution. I guess I'm not someone who feels that I want to or can survive on my own, sort of holed up in a cave for 2 years. And what are you going to come out to?
Well, that's the other question. Yes, exactly.
That's the thing. So I'm not in any way belittling that or putting that down. I mean, I think everyone has their own inclinations, but I guess what I'm trying to do for my part is to talk about these issues with people like yourself, to try to get the word out. And I'm really concerned about sort of the longer-term future and, what do we leave our children? What is the situation going to be? How do we essentially, as my wife sometimes say, help save the planet or help save civilization on it? So maybe that sounds a little altruistic, but that's really where I'm coming from.
I understand, and certainly a lot of people in our audience are thinking a little more personally about this. So they are building their facilities underground.
Yeah, and I would never put that down. I think that's a wonderful thing.
I think it's smart. Very smart.
It's a very smart thing, but of course it depends on where you are. Sometimes people say to me, oh, you're in Boston, you could just go down the subway system underground. Well, no, that's going to totally flood when all the electricity goes out.
Exactly, right.
Because they have to pump it. People don't even think about that. I only use it as a simple example.
That's a good one, and I think there's a lot of important points to be brought out about this, because I've heard so many people in the cities say to me, well, we're just, because I'm in a rural area, out in the middle of nowhere. And they're like, well, we'll just come up to your area. Well, they got a news flash coming in real clear. We don't want those people up here. And
well, not only that, but then how are they going to get there? They're going to get in their cars. They're going to try to start their car. Their car won't start anyway. Right. They'll run out of gas before they get there, if they did start their car.
and there's no really simple way. Like they think, we'll just come up where you are. We'll live off the land. And we had Evan Pritchard on here, who's a university professor, also Mi'kmaq Native American. He said, hey, guess what, everybody? It's not that easy to live off the land. You got to know what you're doing.
And it's not only do people not know what they're doing, but if some of the things we talked about now, if surface radiation, that type of thing is occurring, you may have to wait a few years minimally before you can even try to, quote, live off the land.
That's right.
Being on the land is not where you necessarily want to be, on the land versus underneath. For protection. Yeah.
And again, those tunnels are so intriguing that you talk about in Forgotten Civilization. I just would love to see more pictures and even videos of these kinds of things, because in places they sound very elaborate, like they were going to plan on being underground for a period of time.
Absolutely. And I've been doing more research on that, and some of this will come out in the next book. I'm always working on the next book.
Oh, good for you. Well, your students must love taking your classes.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, because it's all interesting, and it's all something that matters, and I think that's terrific for students to hear about at least a few things like that with their expensive college educations today.
No, I agree. But I think that's the way you said is very important. It does matter. These things do matter.
They do, and I'd like to see more people falling behind you in this, and maybe you can get those students to get active and really start campaigning with the legislators and saying the monies need to be put aside for this, because we need preparation on community levels, and also people need to be made aware of what could be happening as soon as tomorrow. So preppers who are involved in this kind of thing, and this has become a big part of their lives, they are planning. They are building their underground facilities. They are also working on, storing food for long periods of time, and waters and things like that, whether it's water for waste or water for actual hydration. I mean, there's a lot to be taken into consideration when you're thinking about what if I have to go underground for a period of time. So, again, I congratulate preppers who are devoting time and effort to this, and they're really thinking things through. And they'll be the ones that survive. They'll be the ones that can hold out for a year or more if necessary, and if they're in the right part of the country that's not going to be flooded underground and things like that. But there's a wealth of information in your book. You build an incredible and interesting case for this that is very confrontive, but it's going to open a lot of eyes. People need to read this book and get very, very aware of what's happening with our sun. And we are not living in a stagnant environment here. Everything's alive, the planet, the sun, and we need to start paying attention. We've lost that connection. So we are acting like zombies.
I absolutely agree with you. We've lost that connection. That's something I try to talk about in the book. And also, I think you make a very good point. You mentioned my students. I think the younger generation, if we can have the next generation growing up, not having the old paradigm, but changing the paradigm, paying attention to these things, preparing long term. I look for hope there.
Well, I'm glad you're in that environment, because certainly these students have a lot of energy. They have a lot of enthusiasm. If they could throw it behind a project such as this, it would benefit everybody, including the planet and the animals and all of us that live here. But it's going to take a tsunami of effort, I think, to get people in power to wake up and to put some resources into this.
Exactly, and I worry that they might not wake up, at least those in power, until something happens, and then it may be too late.
It may very well be, and that would be horribly unfortunate for everybody. But your book is just tremendous. I can't say enough good things about it. I love reading it, and people will enjoy it. Make sure you buy it, everybody. It's a great Christmas present or anytime present, called Forgotten Civilization, The Role of Solar Outbursts in Our Past and future. It is by Dr. Robert M. Schoch. And Robert, thank you so much again.
Oh, you're
for
very
coming
welcome.
on the show today. I know there's just still so much more we didn't even get to. We're going to have you come back. So.
Oh, it'd be my pleasure.
Well, thank you. It's totally been mine today, speaking with you on this very important topic. So have a wonderful holiday season. Thank you again for coming on the show. And everybody tune in, not next week because we're taking some holiday time from Power Preppers and also Supernatural Girls. But Saturday night, make sure you tune in. If you want to talk to Travis Walton, here is your chance. So make sure you tune in 9 to 11. And just go to our website, supernaturalgirls.com, and sign up for our newsletter. You'll be alerted to all the shows and all the special giveaways and everything else. So thanks again, Robert, and thank you, everybody. We will be back with you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to tune in next week for another terrific episode of Power Preppers with Patricia Baker.